You don't need to be louder to be stronger. You don't need to explain more to be respected. And you don't need approval to stand your ground. The people who command the most respect rarely raise their voice. They don't chase attention. They don't react emotionally. They don't prove themselves. They move calmly. They speak selectively. They act with certainty. That is quiet confidence. And once you build it, people feel it before you say a word. This audiobook will show you why silence is strength, restraint is power, and composure is authority. You have a choice. Stay reactive and overlooked, or become unmistakably respected. Chapter 1. Stop trying to be impressive. Stop. Right now. Stop trying to be impressive. Because the moment you try to impress someone, you give them power over you. That's the truth most people don't want to hear. They think respect comes from saying the right thing, looking smart, acting confident, performing. But respect doesn't come from performance. It comes from consistency. That's the key. Look closely at the people you truly respect. Not the loud ones. Not the flashy ones. The solid ones. They don't talk much about what they're going to do. They don't sell themselves. They don't chase reactions. They show up the same way every day. Calm. Reliable. Grounded. You feel them before they speak. And that's not an accident. You have a choice. Perform for attention, or operate with quiet certainty. Most people choose performance. They decorate their words. They exaggerate their stories. They explain too much. They react too fast. And every one of those behaviors signals insecurity. It's not about confidence. It's about approval. That's the flaw. Trying to impress is not strength. It's compensation. You're compensating for doubt, for fear, for the belief that who you are isn't enough unless someone reacts positively. That's why impressive people are rarely respected long-term. They burn bright, then fade, because performance is exhausting, and eventually it cracks. Quiet confidence doesn't crack, because it's not built on reaction. It's built on discipline. That's the discipline. Here's what happens when you stop trying to impress. Your words slow down. Your movements become deliberate. Your decisions become cleaner. You stop adding unnecessary details. You stop justifying yourself. You stop seeking validation through noise. And something shifts. People start leaning in. They start listening more carefully. They start taking you seriously. Why? Because certainty doesn't need decoration. That's the key. When someone speaks simply, without urgency, without over-explaining, the brain reads it as confidence. When someone acts consistently without emotional spikes, the nervous system reads it as safety and authority. Respect is a biological response, not a social trick, and performance disrupts that response. Think about it. Have you ever watched someone talk too much in a meeting? Explaining every angle, jumping in too fast, trying to sound valuable. What did you feel? Not respect, discomfort, because deep down you knew they were trying. Now think of the person who spoke once, briefly, clearly, then stopped. No extra words, no apology. Who felt stronger? You already know the answer. You don't need their permission to stop performing. You don't need approval to be composed. You don't need attention to be respected. You need alignment, consistency between who you are, what you say, and what you do. That's it. Here's a hard truth. Every time you try to impress someone, you teach them how to treat you. You teach them that your value is negotiable, that your presence needs justification, that your words need reinforcement, and people will take you at that value. Well, you have a choice. Stop auditioning for respect. Start embodying it. That shift begins with behavior, not mindset. Behavior. Here's what you stop doing. You stop explaining decisions that don't require explanation. You stop filling silence out of discomfort. You stop responding immediately to everything. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. That's the key. When you pause before speaking, you signal thoughtfulness. When you speak less, your words carry weight. When you don't rush to impress, others start projecting value onto you. This is psychological law. People respect what doesn't chase them. That applies to attention, to approval, to validation. It's not about arrogance. It's about self-trust. You trust that your actions will speak. You trust that your consistency will be noticed. You trust that you don't need to perform. That trust is quiet confidence. And quiet confidence commands respect. Now let's talk about results. Because this isn't theory. In the real world, the most respected people are not the most expressive. They're the most predictable in a good way. Predictable calm. Predictable standards. Predictable boundaries. They don't swing emotionally. They don't overreact. They don't overpromise. They deliver. And delivery beats display every time. It's not about charisma. It's about reliability. That's the discipline. Here's a practical instruction. For the next 7 days, do this. Before you speak, ask one question. Is this necessary? Not helpful, not interesting, necessary. If it's not necessary, don't say it. Before you explain yourself, ask, did anyone actually ask for this explanation? If not, stop. Before you react emotionally, ask, what happens if I don't respond right now? Most of the time, the answer is nothing. That's when you realize how much energy you've been wasting on performance, and how much respect you've been leaking because of it. You have a choice. Every interaction is a fork in the road. Impress or anchor. Perform or remain steady. Seek approval or stand firm. One path feels good short-term. The other builds authority long-term. That's the key. Quiet confidence is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't compete. It observes, chooses. It acts when it matters. And people feel safe around it. They trust it. They respect it. Not because it demands respect, but because it never begs for it. You don't need their permission to stop trying. You need discipline. Because it's not about impressing others. It's about respecting yourself enough to stay consistent. That consistency becomes your reputation. And once that reputation forms, you don't have to do anything else. Now you've stopped trying to be impressive. Good. Because once performance ends, something else begins. Control. And control starts with how you manage your energy, especially when emotions rise. You've mastered restraint. Now, let's talk about what happens when you stop reacting. Chapter 2. Loud energy signals inner uncertainty. Watch closely. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. They talk more, move more, react faster, and every one of those behaviors is leaking information. Loud energy doesn't signal power. It signals instability. That's the truth. People don't raise their voice because they're confident. They raise it because they're unsure they're being heard. They over-explain because they don't trust their position. They react emotionally because they feel threatened. It's not about volume. It's about stability. That's the discipline. True confidence is quiet because it doesn't need reinforcement. Think about it. When someone is grounded, they don't rush. They don't interrupt. They don't dominate the space with noise. They wait, and that waiting creates pressure. Silence is not empty. Silence is loaded. That's the key. When you rush to fill silence, you reveal discomfort. When you tolerate silence, you project control. You have a choice. Fill the space with noise, or let the space work for you. Most people can't stand silence. They mistake it for awkwardness, for weakness, for loss of control. So they jump in. They explain more. They justify themselves. They talk their way out of authority. And they don't even realize they're doing it. Here's the pattern. Someone questions them. They feel tension. They respond immediately. They add extra words, just in case. That's fear talking. It's not about clarity. It's about insecurity. That's the flaw. Calm people don't fear being misunderstood. They trust that clarity doesn't come from quantity. They speak once. They stop. They let it land. And if it doesn't land, they don't panic. Because their identity isn't tied to immediate approval. You don't need their permission to pause. You don't need approval to be silent. You don't need validation to stay composed. That composure is what people read as authority. This is not theory. It's physiology. The nervous system mirrors energy. When you're frantic, others feel unsettled. When you're calm, others regulate around you. That's why calm people become anchors in chaos. They don't absorb the noise. They absorb the room. And that absorption is power. Loud energy tries to control the environment. Quiet energy controls itself. That's the key. Now let's be clear. This isn't about becoming passive. It's not about becoming invisible. It's about becoming deliberate. You speak when it matters. You move when it counts. You react only when necessary. That selectivity makes everything you do heavier. Think of energy like currency. If you spend it everywhere, it's worth nothing. If you spend it rarely, people pay attention. That's the discipline. Here's where most people get it wrong. They think confidence means dominance. They think control means overpowering. So they interrupt. They talk over others. They push opinions aggressively. But dominance is brittle. The moment it's challenged, it collapses. Stability doesn't collapse. It holds. And holding is what people trust. Here's a hard instruction. Stop reacting immediately. When someone challenges you, pause. When someone questions you, breathe. When someone provokes you, wait. That pause does three things. First, it interrupts emotional hijacking. Second, it forces the other person to reveal their intent. Third, it positions you as the grounded one. That's the key. Silence forces the other person to keep talking. And the more they talk, the more they expose themselves. You don't need to dominate. You need to outlast. This is especially important in conflict. The person who escalates loses leverage. The person who stays calm gains it. It's not about winning arguments. It's about controlling the tone. Tone determines outcome. And tone comes from stability. You have a choice. React emotionally and hand over control. Or regulate yourself and take it back. Most people think restraint is weakness. They're wrong. Restraint is strength under control. That's discipline. Now let's talk about over-explaining. Over-explaining is a confession. It says, I don't trust that my statement stands on its own. Strong people state facts. Weak energy adds footnotes. If you say yes, say yes. If you say no, say no. If you make a decision, own it. No story. No defense. No apology. You don't need their permission to be decisive. Every extra explanation dilutes authority, because explanations invite negotiation. Sometimes, clarity is simply stopping. Here's another instruction. Limit your responses, not your thoughts. Your responses. You don't need to share every insight. You don't need to respond to every message immediately. You don't need to react to every opinion. Choose. That choice builds internal control. And internal control always shows externally. People feel it. They can't explain it, but they sense it. That's why quiet confidence commands respect. It doesn't demand attention. It attracts it. Now notice something important. When you lower your volume emotionally and verbally, you raise your presence. You walk slower. You listen more. You decide carefully. Others start adjusting to you. They speak more clearly. They hesitate before challenging you. They take you seriously, not because you said anything different, but because your energy changed. That's the key. Energy always speaks before words. If your energy is scattered, no amount of strong language will save you. If your energy is stable, even simple words carry weight. So here's the practice. For the next week, observe yourself. Notice when you feel the urge to speak quickly. Notice when you want to fill silence. Notice when emotion pushes you to react. That's the moment of choice. Pause. Lower your energy. Let silence stretch. You'll feel uncomfortable at first. That's normal. You're breaking a habit of compensation. But on the other side of that discomfort is control. And control is the foundation of respect. It's not about volume. It's about stability. That's the discipline. You don't need their permission to calm down. You don't need approval to slow your response. You don't need validation to remain quiet. You have a choice. Every moment. Loud reaction or steady presence. Noise or control. Impulse or discipline. You're learning to regulate your energy. Good. Because once you can control your internal state, something powerful happens. You stop being pulled by the room. You start controlling it. And the next step is learning how to use that control when emotions rise. You've learned that loud energy signals inner uncertainty. Now let's go deeper. Because the person who controls their reactions controls the room. Chapter 3. Control your reactions, control the room. Power is not who speaks first. Power is who reacts last. Read that again. The person who reacts least holds the most control. Not because they're passive, but because they're disciplined. That's the key. Every room has an emotional current. Someone gets triggered. Voices rise. Energy spikes. And in that moment, there are two types of people. Those who get pulled into the current, and those who stand still. The ones who stand still take over. You have a choice. React emotionally and join the chaos, or regulate yourself and become the anchor. Most people choose reaction. They feel challenged. They feel disrespected. They feel pressure. So they respond immediately. Tone sharpens. Body tightens. Words spill out. And in that instant, they lose the room. Because emotional reaction is a confession. It says, "This situation controls me." That's the flaw. Calmness says the opposite. "I control myself." And self-control is the highest form of authority. That's the discipline. Think about every powerful leader you've encountered. In crisis, they don't rush. They don't shout. They don't panic. They slow down. Because speed belongs to fear. Stillness belongs to power. When someone escalates and you don't, the balance shifts immediately. They're exposed. You're centered. That contrast is dominance. That's the key. People instinctively follow the one who doesn't flinch. Because the human brain looks for stability under pressure. Who feels safe? Who feels grounded? Who isn't being dragged by emotion? That person becomes the reference point, and the room aligns around them. This is why emotional restraint is not weakness. It's strategy. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need approval to pause. You don't need validation to breathe. You only need discipline. Here's where most people misunderstand control. They think control means suppression. It doesn't. Suppression hides emotion until it explodes. Control observes emotion and chooses not to act on it. Huge difference. One builds pressure. The other builds authority. You feel anger. You feel frustration. You feel challenged. Those feelings aren't the problem. Acting from them is. It's not about the emotion. It's about the reaction. That's the key. Here's the rule. The moment you react emotionally, you give away leverage. Why? Because now the other person knows how to move you. They've found the button. And once someone knows your button, they can control you. You have a choice. Protect your reactions. Or give them away freely. The most respected people are not emotionless. They're selective. They choose when to respond. They choose how much energy to give. They choose what deserves their attention. Everything else gets nothing. That nothing is power. Now let's make this practical. The next time someone escalates, raises their voice, interrupts, pushes emotionally, do this. Stop talking. Physically still yourself. Lower your shoulders. Slow your breathing. Say nothing. This does two things instantly. First, it interrupts their momentum. Second, it forces them to carry the emotional weight alone. Most people can't handle that. They start rambling. They get defensive. They expose insecurity. Meanwhile, you remain composed. That contrast shifts authority. That's the key. You don't win by overpowering. You win by outlasting. Now here's another mistake people make. They think calm means disengaged. Wrong. Calm is hyper-engaged, internally regulated. Your eyes are steady. Your posture is open. Your attention is present. You're not withdrawing. You're holding. And holding is uncomfortable for emotionally reactive people. Because they want movement. They want reaction. They want feedback. When you don't give it, they lose control. That's discipline. Here's another instruction. Delay your response. Not forever. Just long enough to choose it. A few seconds is enough. Those seconds are the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. You want chosen behavior. Because chosen behavior builds respect. You don't need their permission to take a moment. Anyone who pressures you to respond immediately is trying to control you. Don't fall for it. Calm people decide the pace. That's the key. Now let's talk about status. In any interaction, status is determined by who is affected more. If their words shake you, they have power. If your calm unsettles them, you do. That's the real metric. Not titles, not volume, not dominance. Emotional independence. The ability to remain unchanged by someone else's intensity. That's quiet confidence. And quiet confidence commands respect. Here's a hard truth. If you're easily provoked, you're easily controlled. Read that again. You have a choice. Train emotional restraint, or keep handing over leverage. Most people never train this. They live on impulse. They justify reactions as honesty. They confuse expression with strength. But expression without control is chaos. And chaos never commands respect. Control does. That's the discipline. Now imagine this. You walk into a tense room. People are stressed. Voices are tight. You speak calmly, slowly, with certainty. No rush, no edge. The room softens. Why? Because nervous systems synchronize. Your calm becomes contagious. That's leadership. Leadership is emotional regulation at scale. Not authority. Not commands. Regulation. This is why the calmest person often becomes the leader, whether they want to or not. People gravitate toward stability. Always. So here's your practice. For the next week, treat every emotional trigger as training. Someone cuts you off. Someone challenges you. Someone disrespects you. Pause. Ask yourself, do I want control or do I want release? Because reaction feels good for a moment. Control pays dividends for a lifetime. That's the key. Lower your reaction. Increase your presence. The less you react, the more others adjust. That's not theory. That's human behavior. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need approval to regulate yourself. You don't need validation to hold the room. You have a choice. React and lose leverage, or remain calm and gain authority. You're learning to control your reactions. Good. Because once reactions are under control, something else becomes possible. Precision. The ability to say exactly what's needed and nothing more. You've learned to hold the room. Now it's time to refine your words. Because power isn't just in restraint. It's in what you choose to say. Chapter 4. Say less, mean more. Most people talk too much. Not because they have more to say, but because they're afraid of silence. And every unnecessary word costs them authority. That's the truth. Authority is not built by volume. It's built by precision. That's the key. When you speak too much, you dilute your message. When you speak with intention, every word lands. Quiet confidence doesn't rush to speak. It waits until there's something worth saying. And that waiting is what makes people listen. You have a choice. Fill space with noise, or fill silence with meaning. Most people choose noise. They explain before being asked. They add disclaimers. They soften statements with unnecessary words. I might be wrong, but just my opinion. Maybe this doesn't make sense, but every one of those phrases weakens your position. It's not humility. It's insecurity. That's the flaw. Confidence doesn't announce itself. It states. Then it stops. Think about how strong statements are delivered. Clear, direct, unapologetic, not aggressive, not emotional, precise. That precision signals self-trust. And self-trust commands respect. That's the discipline. Here's something most people miss. Words don't just communicate ideas. They signal status. The person who speaks the most often holds the least weight. The person who speaks selectively becomes the reference point. Why? Because scarcity creates value. If you speak constantly, your words blend into the noise. If you speak rarely, people lean in. That's the key. Quiet confidence understands this instinctively. It doesn't rush to share opinions. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't compete for airtime. It listens. And listening is not passive. Listening is strategic. Because while others are talking, you're gathering information, patterns, motives, weaknesses. And when you finally speak, you speak from clarity. That clarity is felt. Now let's be honest. Most unnecessary words come from fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being disliked. Fear of not being seen as valuable. So people overtalk. They try to cover every angle. They try to preempt criticism. They try to control perception. And in doing so, they lose control of themselves. You don't need their permission to be brief. You don't need approval to be direct. You don't need validation to stop talking. That restraint is power. Here's the rule. If a sentence doesn't add value, remove it. If an explanation wasn't requested, don't offer it. If silence can do the job, let it. Silence is not absence. Silence is emphasis. That's the key. Think about a conversation where someone says something short and clear, then stops. What happens? The room adjusts. People think. They process. They respond more carefully. Why? Because now the weight is on them. You've shifted the dynamic. You're no longer performing. You're leading. And leadership is often quiet. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means when you do, you speak with intention. Every word has a purpose. Here's a practical instruction. Before you speak, ask 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it timely? If the answer is no to any of these, don't speak. That filter alone will cut your words in half and double their impact. That's discipline. Now let's talk about intention. Speaking with intention means you know why you're speaking, not to fill silence, not to soothe discomfort, not to impress, but to move something forward, a decision, a boundary, a direction. When your words have direction, people follow. When they don't, people tune out. It's not about being silent all the time. It's about choosing when to speak. That's the key. Here's another hard truth. People respect clarity more than warmth. Warmth without clarity feels unstable. Clarity without noise feels strong. You can be calm and direct at the same time. You can be kind and firm at the same time. Quiet confidence doesn't apologize for clarity. It delivers it. Now let's address the fear underneath all this. The fear that if you say less, you'll disappear. That if you don't explain, you'll be misunderstood. That if you don't talk, you'll lose influence. The opposite is true. Influence grows when you stop oversharing. Because now your presence becomes felt, not heard. That's the key. Here's another exercise. In your next 3 conversations, practice this. Let the other person finish completely. Pause for 2 seconds. Then respond with 1 sentence. Not 2. 1. You'll feel the urge to add more. Resist it. That resistance builds control. And control builds authority. You have a choice. Say everything you're thinking, or say only what matters. Most people dump thoughts. Quiet confidence delivers conclusions. That's discipline. Now observe what happens. People start responding differently. They ask better questions. They pay closer attention. Because now you've changed the rhythm. You're no longer reacting. You're setting pace. And the one who sets pace leads. This applies everywhere. Work, relationships, conflict. The fewer words you use, the less room there is to challenge you. Because challenges feed on excess. Precision leaves no cracks. That's the key. You don't need their permission to stop explaining. You don't need approval to be concise. You don't need validation to let silence speak. You're learning to say less. Good. Because when words are controlled, something else becomes visible. Your boundaries, what you allow, what you don't. Words define boundaries, and boundaries define respect. You've learned to control reactions. You've learned to control words. Now it's time to remove the final leak. The need for validation. Because as long as you seek it, your confidence is conditional. And conditional confidence never commands respect. Chapter 5. Detach from the need for validation. The need for validation is loud. Even when you don't say a word, people can feel it. They feel it in how quickly you agree, in how often you check reactions, in how carefully you phrase things to avoid disapproval. Approval-seeking leaks through behavior, and once it leaks, respect drains out. That's the truth. You can't hide the need for validation. You can only eliminate it. That's the key. Most people think validation is harmless. They call it politeness. They call it teamwork. They call it being liked. But underneath it's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict. Fear of standing alone. That fear shapes behavior. And behavior is what people judge. Not intentions. Not inner thoughts. Behavior. You have a choice. Chase reassurance. Or stand grounded in self-trust. One path makes you agreeable. The other makes you respected. You don't get both. That's the discipline. Let's get clear about something. Seeking validation is not asking for feedback. It's outsourcing your sense of worth. You check faces after you speak. You adjust opinions mid-sentence. You retreat when there's resistance. You're not responding to reality. You're responding to approval signals. And people sense it instantly. They may not name it, but they feel it. And what they feel is uncertainty. That's the flaw. When your confidence depends on how others react, your confidence is fragile. It rises and falls with opinions. Praise makes you lighter. Criticism makes you smaller. That's not confidence. That's dependency. Quiet confidence is independent. It doesn't need agreement to exist. It doesn't need applause to stand. It doesn't need reassurance to move forward. That independence is magnetic, because people respect what doesn't beg them to exist. That's the key. Here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing validation, you start receiving respect. Not because people suddenly like you more, but because you stop asking them to confirm your worth. And that changes everything. Think about it. Have you ever respected someone who constantly needed reassurance? Someone who asked, "Is that okay? Do you think that was right? Are you sure you're fine with this?" Probably not. You may have liked them. You may have sympathized. But respect? No. Now think of someone who made decisions calmly, who didn't explain themselves excessively, who didn't seek permission to exist. That person felt solid, grounded. That's the difference. It's not about arrogance. It's about self-trust. That's the discipline. Self-trust means you accept responsibility for your decisions. If they work, you own it. If they fail, you learn. But you don't look outward for emotional approval. You look inward for alignment. You ask, is this consistent with who I am and what I value? Not, will this make them approve of me? That shift is everything. You don't need their permission to trust yourself. You don't need approval to hold your ground. You don't need validation to remain steady. You have a choice. Let validation drive you, or let principles guide you. One creates anxiety. The other creates calm. That's the key. Now let's talk about behavior, because detaching from validation is not an idea. It's a practice. Here's what you stop doing. You stop over-apologizing. You stop softening truths to avoid discomfort. You stop changing your stance mid-conversation. Those behaviors signal uncertainty. Instead, you do this. You speak clearly. You listen fully. You accept disagreement without defensiveness. You don't argue to be liked. You don't explain to be approved. You don't retreat to be safe. You remain steady. That steadiness is what people trust. That's discipline. Here's another hard truth. If you're afraid of being disliked, you'll always be controlled. Because anyone can move you by withholding approval. They can pressure you, guilt you, manipulate you. Why? Because your emotional center is outside of you. The moment you detach from validation, manipulation loses power. Because there's nothing to grab. That's the key. Now this doesn't mean you become cold. It means you become stable. You still care. You still listen. You still adjust when it makes sense. But you don't bend your core for approval. Your core stays intact. That integrity is felt. People may disagree with you. They may not like every decision. But they will respect you. Because respect comes from consistency, not compliance. It's not about being liked. It's about being aligned. That's the discipline. Here's a practical exercise. For the next week, notice validation-seeking impulses. The urge to explain yourself. The urge to justify a decision. The urge to soften a boundary. When you feel it, pause. Ask yourself one question. Am I doing this to be understood or to be approved? If it's approval, stop. Let the discomfort sit. Discomfort is the price of independence. And independence is the foundation of quiet confidence. That's the key. You'll feel tension at first. Your body is used to chasing reassurance. Your mind is used to scanning reactions. That habit won't disappear overnight. But every time you don't act on it, you get stronger. Every time you hold your ground, your self-trust grows. And as self-trust grows, the need for validation fades. Naturally. Now here's something important. When you stop chasing validation, you stop chasing people. And when you stop chasing people, they start coming to you. Not because you're playing a game, but because you've removed desperation from your energy. Desperation repels. Calm attracts. That's human nature. Quiet confidence doesn't ask, is this okay with you? It asks, is this right for me? That's the shift. You have a choice. Build your identity on reactions, or build it on principles. One is unstable. The other is unshakable. That's the discipline. Now notice how all of this connects. You stop trying to impress. You lowered your emotional volume. You controlled your reactions. You spoke with intention. Now you're removing the final dependency, the need for validation. And when that goes, something powerful replaces it. Chapter 6. Stillness is psychological pressure. Most people misunderstand power. They think power pushes. They think power argues. They think power dominates. Real power waits. Stillness is not passive. Stillness is pressure. That's the key. When you are still, physically, emotionally, verbally, you create a vacuum. And human beings hate vacuums. They rush to fill them. They talk more. They explain themselves. They reveal intentions. Meanwhile, you reveal nothing. And that imbalance is power. You have a choice. Fill space to relieve tension, or let tension work for you. Most people can't tolerate stillness. Their bodies fidget. Their words spill out. Their emotions leak. Because stillness forces self-awareness. And emotionally driven people don't want that. Calm body language unsettles them. That's not opinion. That's observation. Crossed arms. Rapid gestures. Leaning forward aggressively. Those are signs of inner agitation. Stillness does the opposite. Relaxed shoulders. Slow movements. Steady eyes. That calm sends a message without words. I'm not affected. That message is destabilizing to reactive people. That's the key. Quiet confidence doesn't confront. It outlasts. When someone is emotional, they want friction. They want reaction. They want engagement on their terms. Stillness denies them that. And without reaction, their energy collapses. They have two options: escalate further, or reveal themselves. Most reveal themselves. They overtalk. They contradict. They show insecurity. All because you stayed still. You don't need their permission to remain calm. You don't need approval to hold your posture. You don't need validation to stay quiet. Stillness is your choice, and it's a strategic one. Here's something important. Stillness is not freezing. It's grounded presence. You are aware. You are listening. You are engaged. But you're not reacting. That difference matters. Freezing comes from fear. Stillness comes from control. That's the discipline. Think about negotiations. The person who speaks first after an offer loses leverage. Why? Because silence creates pressure. The one who can tolerate that pressure controls the outcome. This applies everywhere. Work, conflict, relationships. When someone challenges you and you remain still, they feel exposed. They expected resistance. They expected defense. They didn't expect calm. That calm flips the dynamic. That's the key. Now let's talk about restraint. Restraint is not holding back forever. It's choosing when to act. Quiet confidence waits for the moment that matters. It doesn't waste energy on small battles. It doesn't correct every misunderstanding. It doesn't defend against every jab. Because it knows something. Time reveals everything. That's the discipline. Your restraint forces others to keep going. And the longer they go, the more they show. Their motives, their emotions, their weaknesses. Meanwhile, you stay composed. That contrast builds authority. You have a choice. React immediately and reveal yourself. Or wait and let them reveal themselves. Most people rush. They think speed equals strength. It doesn't. Speed equals impulse. Impulse is predictable. And predictable people are easy to control. Stillness is unpredictable, and unpredictability creates caution. People slow down around you. They measure their words. They think twice, because they can't read you. That's power. Not mystery for the sake of mystery, but emotional independence. That's the key. Now here's where people get uncomfortable. Stillness feels awkward at first. Your body wants to move. Your mind wants to speak. That urge is conditioning. You've been trained to smooth tension, to ease discomfort, to be agreeable. Stillness breaks that training, and growth always feels uncomfortable. You don't need their permission to feel uncomfortable. Discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is expansion. That's discipline. Here's a practice. Next time you're in a tense interaction, do this. Plant your feet. Relax your shoulders. Slow your breathing. Say nothing. Maintain eye contact, but soften it. Let the moment breathe. Count to 5 in your head. That's it. 5 seconds of stillness. You'll be shocked at what happens. The other person fills the space. They talk more. They adjust. Because the pressure shifted to them. That's the key. Stillness changes who carries the emotional weight. Normally, reactive people dump their emotions onto others. Stillness refuses to carry that load. So they're forced to carry it themselves. Most can't. They crack. Not violently, but verbally. And that gives you information. Information is leverage. Quiet confidence collects information. It doesn't rush to act. Now let's be clear. This is not manipulation. This is self-control. You're not provoking. You're not intimidating. You're regulating yourself. And regulation is always ethical. You are simply refusing to participate in chaos. That's discipline. Now connect this to the bigger picture. You stopped trying to impress. You lowered your volume. You controlled your reactions. You spoke with intention. You detached from validation. Now stillness becomes natural. Because you're no longer trying to get something from others. You're not seeking approval. You're not chasing comfort. So silence no longer feels threatening. Feels grounded. And grounded silence is powerful. That's the key. People associate stillness with confidence. Because confidence doesn't hurry. It doesn't explain. It doesn't flinch. It waits. And waiting signals abundance. I don't need to rush. That message is felt instantly. Now here's the shift. Once you master stillness, people begin to reveal themselves before you ever speak. They project intentions. They show insecurities. They give away leverage. All because you held your ground. Quiet confidence doesn't confront. It outlasts. Remember that. Outlasting wins. Always. You don't need their permission to remain still. You don't need approval to let silence stretch. You don't need validation to let others show their hand. You have a choice. Break the tension to feel relief. Or hold the tension to gain control. Choose control. Because stillness is not empty. Stillness is psychological pressure. And once you can apply that pressure calmly, something else becomes possible. Boundaries. The ability to decide what you allow and what you don't without raising your voice. You've learned to use silence. Now it's time to use structure. Chapter 7. Respect comes from boundaries, not niceness. Niceness is easy. Respect is not. And confusing the two will cost you everything. Being agreeable is not the same as being respected. Say that again. Being agreeable is not the same as being respected. Nice people get smiled at. Respected people get listened to. That's the key. Most people choose niceness because it feels safe. They say yes when they mean no. They avoid conflict. They soften boundaries to keep peace. And in doing so, they teach others exactly how far they can be pushed. Boundaries create clarity. Niceness creates confusion. That confusion invites disrespect. You have a choice. Be liked for being flexible, or be respected for being firm. You don't get both by default. That's the discipline. Let's be clear. Boundaries are not aggression. They are not cruelty. They are not coldness. Boundaries are information. They tell people where you end and where they begin. And people respect clarity far more than compliance. That's the truth. When someone never says no, their yes means nothing. When someone sets limits calmly, their words carry weight. Quiet confidence knows when to say no and doesn't apologize for it. That's the key. Apologizing for boundaries weakens them. It sends the message that your limits are negotiable. They are not. You don't need their permission to protect your time. You don't need approval to say no. You don't need validation to stand firm. Boundaries are self-respect in action, and self-respect invites respect from others. It's not about being cold. It's about being firm. There's a difference. Coldness pushes people away. Firmness holds a line. Firmness is calm. Firmness is steady. Firmness doesn't explain itself excessively. It simply exists. That's discipline. Now here's the mistake most people make. They wait until they're angry to set boundaries. Too late. By then, emotions are involved. Tone sharpens. Words escalate. And what could have been a calm boundary becomes a conflict. Quiet confidence sets boundaries early, before resentment builds, before frustration leaks, before respect erodes. That's the key. Boundaries are proactive, not reactive. They don't need drama. They don't need speeches. They need consistency. Consistency is what makes boundaries real. If you say no once and yes the next time, you don't have a boundary. You have a mood, and moods don't command respect. Discipline does. You have a choice. Enforce boundaries consistently, or keep explaining why you're upset. One builds authority. The other builds exhaustion. Now let's talk about saying no. Saying no does not require justification. Read that again. Saying no does not require justification. Every explanation you add invites negotiation. I can't because, maybe later, just this once. Those phrases weaken your position. A firm no is simple. No, that doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. Then stop. Silence after a boundary is powerful. That silence says, this is not up for debate. That's the key. Quiet confidence doesn't argue boundaries. It enforces them. People may test you. They may push back. They may guilt you. That's normal. Testing is how people learn where the line actually is. If you hold it, respect grows. If you bend, the line moves. And once the line moves, it keeps moving. That's the flaw. Boundaries are not one-time statements. They are patterns. And patterns are built through repetition. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to explain. You just need to be consistent. That's discipline. Here's a practical instruction. Pick one area of your life where you've been too nice. Work, family, Friends. Just one. Now identify one boundary you've been avoiding. Something small. Not dramatic. Not confrontational. Simple. Then state it clearly. Once. Calmly. Without apology. And when it's tested, and it will be, repeat it. Word for word. No added emotion. No extra explanation. Repetition without emotion is strength. That's the key. People respect what doesn't change under pressure. Now let's address the fear. The fear that if you set boundaries, people will leave. Some will. And that's not a loss. That's a filter. People who only stay when you have no boundaries are not respecting you. They're using you. Boundaries reveal who belongs in your life. That's discipline. Quiet confidence accepts this. It doesn't chase people who disappear when limits appear. It lets them go. Because respect from yourself comes first. And without self-respect, no external respect matters. You have a choice. Sacrifice yourself to keep peace. Or protect yourself and gain respect. Peace without respect is resentment waiting to happen. That's the key. Now notice how this fits the larger pattern. You stopped trying to impress. You lowered your emotional volume. You controlled your reactions. You spoke with intention. You detached from validation. You mastered stillness. Boundaries are the natural result. Because once you're calm, regulated, and self-trusting, you no longer fear saying no. You no longer fear disapproval. You no longer fear standing alone. That fear was the flaw. Discipline is clarity. And clarity commands respect. It's not about being harsh. It's about being honest. Honest about what you allow. Honest about what you won't tolerate. Quiet confidence doesn't announce boundaries. It lives them. And people feel it. They adjust. They respect it. Or they leave. Either way, you win. Because you stayed aligned. You don't need their permission to be firm. You don't need approval to protect your time. You don't need validation to enforce your limits. You have a choice. Be endlessly nice. Or be quietly respected. Choose respect. Because once boundaries are in place, something powerful happens. You stop explaining yourself. You let actions speak. You let outcomes define you. And that's where true authority lives. You've built the structure. Now it's time to remove the noise. Chapter 8. Let actions replace explanations. Explanation is a habit. A bad one. It feels responsible. Feels mature. Feels polite. But most of the time it weakens you. Explaining invites judgment. Action ends debate. That's the key. The moment you explain yourself, you open the door for approval, disagreement, and negotiation. You're saying, here's my reasoning. Please evaluate it. Strong people don't submit their actions for review. They act. And then they let the results speak. That's discipline. Think about the most respected people you know. They don't defend their decisions in advance. They don't justify every move. They don't argue about intentions. They deliver outcomes. And outcomes shut mouths. That's the truth. You have a choice. Explain to be understood. Or act to be undeniable. Most people explain because they're afraid of being judged. They want to control perception. So they talk. They clarify. They justify. They defend. And in doing so, they give away authority. Because explanation puts you on trial. Action closes the case. That's the key. Here's the pattern. You make a decision. Someone questions it. You feel pressure. So you explain. Now the conversation shifts. It's no longer about the decision. It's about whether your reasoning is good enough. You've lost control. You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need approval to act. You don't need validation to commit. Quiet confidence understands this. It doesn't argue with doubts. It replaces doubt with execution. That's discipline. Now let's be clear. This is not about refusing all communication. It's about choosing when explanation is necessary and when it's not. If someone needs instructions to do their job, explain. If someone questions your authority or decision, act. There's a difference. Most explanations are not about clarity. They're about reassurance. That's the flaw. Reassurance seeking disguises itself as professionalism. But underneath, it's fear of criticism, fear of being wrong, fear of being judged. And fear makes you talk. Calm makes you move. That's the key. Here's a hard truth. The more you explain, the less confident you appear. Because confident people trust that their actions will justify themselves. They don't need to narrate. They let time do the talking. You don't need their permission to stop explaining. You need discipline. Discipline to act without commentary. Discipline to tolerate misunderstanding temporarily. Discipline to let outcomes unfold. That discipline builds authority. Now let's talk about defense. Defensiveness is explanation under pressure. Someone questions you. You feel attacked. You defend. Defense signals insecurity. It says, I'm not sure this will hold. Strong people don't defend good decisions. They stand by them. They adjust later if needed. But they don't argue in the moment. That's the key. Here's another instruction. When you feel the urge to explain, ask yourself one question. Will my results answer this better than my words? If yes, stop talking. That silence is strength. Because silence says, I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to do the work. That message is felt instantly. Now think about how this changes dynamics. When you stop explaining, people stop interrogating. When you stop defending, people stop attacking. Because there's nothing to push against. You've removed the hook. That's discipline. Now let's talk about outcomes. Outcomes are objective. They don't care about opinions. They don't respond to emotions. They either exist or they don't. When your focus shifts from explanation to execution, everything sharpens. Your priorities become clear. Your time is protected. Your energy is focused. That focus compounds. And over time, people stop questioning you. Not because you silenced them, but because you built a track record. Track record is the highest form of authority. That's the key. Now let's address the fear of being misunderstood. Yes, people may misunderstand you. Yes, they may judge prematurely. Let them. Misunderstanding is temporary. Results are permanent. Quiet confidence accepts this. It doesn't rush to correct perception. It trusts time. Time plus consistency equals credibility. That's discipline. Here's a practical exercise. For the next week, remove one explanation per day. 1. Notice when you start to justify. Stop. Replace words with action. Finish the task. Deliver the result. Hold the boundary. Then observe. People adapt. They always do. Because clarity through action is undeniable. You have a choice. Spend energy explaining intentions. Or spend energy producing outcomes. One feels safer. The other builds respect. Choose respect. Now connect this to everything you've learned. You stopped trying to impress. You regulated your energy. You controlled reactions. You spoke with intention. You detached from validation. You used stillness. You set boundaries. Now actions replace words. Because words were never the source of authority. Behavior was. That's the key. Quiet confidence is not persuasive. It's consistent. And consistency is built through action. You don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need approval to execute. You don't need validation to let results speak. You have a choice. Explain endlessly. Or act decisively. Because when actions speak, words become unnecessary. And when words become unnecessary, something powerful happens. You stop caring about being understood. You become comfortable being misunderstood. That's the final test of independence. Because misunderstanding no longer shakes you, frees you. You've learned to act without explaining. Now it's time to learn how to live without needing to be understood. That's the final layer of quiet confidence. Chapter 9. Become comfortable with being misunderstood. Most people live trapped, not by circumstances, not by limitations, by the need to be understood. They explain, they clarify, they correct, over and over again, and every correction costs them freedom. Quiet confidence accepts misunderstanding as the price of independence. That's the key. The moment you decide that everyone must understand you, you hand them control. Because now your behavior is guided by perception, not principle. You adjust. You justify. You soften. Not because it's right, but because you want to be seen correctly. That's the flaw. The strongest people you know are often misunderstood. Not because they're unclear, but because they refuse to live inside other people's interpretations. They know something most people don't. You will be misunderstood no matter what you do. So you might as well be misunderstood for being disciplined. You have a choice. Spend your life correcting perceptions, or spend your life building reality. One is exhausting, the other is freeing. That's the discipline. Let's be honest. Misunderstanding feels uncomfortable. It triggers something deep. The need to explain, the urge to defend, the impulse to fix. Why? Because being misunderstood feels like losing control. But that's an illusion. Control never came from perception. Came from alignment. When your actions align with your values, misunderstanding loses power. Because you're no longer outsourcing identity. That's the key. Quiet confidence doesn't panic when misunderstood. It doesn't rush to clarify. It doesn't correct every false assumption. It lets time and consistency do the work. Time reveals truth better than words ever could. Most people never develop this discipline. They chase approval disguised as understanding. They think, if I just explain better, they'll get it. They won't, because people don't see you as you are. They see you as they are. That's the truth. And once you accept that, you stop trying to manage perception. You start managing behavior. That's discipline. You don't need their permission to be misunderstood. You don't need approval to let silence stand. You don't need validation to move forward. Misunderstanding is not danger. It's space. Space to operate without interference. Space to act without commentary. Space to grow without noise. That space is power. Now let's talk about correction. Correcting perceptions feels productive, but most of the time it's defensive. Someone misjudges you. You feel tension. You rush to explain. And now you're reacting. You've handed them leverage. Quiet confidence does the opposite. It asks one question: does this misunderstanding actually affect my direction? If the answer is no, you let it go. Silence becomes your filter. That's the key. Not every misunderstanding deserves a response. Most don't. They resolve themselves through consistent behavior, or they disappear when they're ignored. Here's the hard truth. If someone wants to misunderstand you, no explanation will fix it. And if someone wants to understand you, no explanation is required. That's discipline. So stop correcting. Start living. Now let's address the fear underneath all of this. The fear of being seen incorrectly, of being judged unfairly, of being labeled. That fear keeps people small. It makes them predictable, compliant, easily managed. But quiet confidence is not afraid of labels. It knows labels don't define outcomes. Actions do. You have a choice. Live to be accurately perceived, or live to be effective. Effectiveness doesn't require consensus. It requires commitment. That's the key. Here's a practical exercise. For the next week, practice selective silence. When someone misinterprets your intentions, pause. Ask yourself, will correcting this change anything meaningful? If not, say nothing. Let it sit. That discomfort you feel, that's growth. That's the discipline most people avoid. Because sitting in misunderstanding without reacting is hard. But it builds something rare. Psychological freedom. Freedom from explanation. Freedom from defense. Freedom from approval. That freedom shows. People feel it. They may not understand you, but they respect you, because you're no longer bending. Now here's something important. Being comfortable with misunderstanding does not mean being careless. It means being intentional. When clarity is necessary for execution, you provide it. When misunderstanding threatens alignment or outcomes, you address it. But you don't chase clarity for ego. You don't explain for comfort. You choose deliberately. That's discipline. Quiet confidence is selective. It knows when to speak. It knows when to stay silent. And most of the time, silence wins. Because silence lets reality speak. And reality always has the final word. You don't need their permission to let time prove you right. You don't need approval to keep moving. You don't need validation to trust your direction. You have a choice. Correct every perception and stay reactive. Or accept misunderstanding and stay free. Choose freedom. Because once you stop needing to be understood, you stop being controlled. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop shrinking. And something settles inside you. Calm. A deep, steady calm. That calm becomes your advantage. Because calm doesn't argue. Calm doesn't rush. Calm doesn't flinch. And people remember how you made them feel under pressure. Which brings us to the final truth. Quiet confidence is not temporary. It compounds. Over time, your calm becomes your reputation. Before you speak, people already know what to expect. Stability, control, presence. You've removed the need to be understood. Now you gain something permanent. A calm advantage that follows you everywhere. And that's where this journey ends. With the realization that calm is not just a response. It's a strategy, permanent one. Chapter 10. Calm is your permanent advantage. Calm is not a mood. It's a strategy. And once you build it, it never leaves you. Emotional control compounds over time. That's the truth most people miss. They think calm is situational. They think it comes and goes. It doesn't. If you practice it, it becomes permanent. And people remember how you made them feel under pressure. Always. That's the key. You can forget words. You can forget details. But you never forget how someone carried themselves when things got difficult. Did they panic? Did they react? Did they escalate? Or did they stay grounded? That memory becomes your reputation. And reputation speaks before you arrive. Quiet confidence understands this. It's not trying to win today's interaction. It's building tomorrow's authority. You have a choice. Remain reactive and temporary, or become unmistakably grounded and lasting. Most people live reactively. They let circumstances dictate their state. They let stress control their tone. They let pressure shape their behavior. And over time, that becomes their identity. Unstable, predictable, easy to read. Calm people are different. They don't spike. They don't crash. They don't swing wildly. They are steady. And steadiness compounds. That's discipline. Think about it. The first time someone sees you calm under pressure, it's impressive. The second time, it's notable. The third time, it's expected. Now you're trusted. Now you're deferred to. Now your presence carries weight. Not because you demanded it, because you earned it. That's the key. Calm presence builds a reputation that speaks before you arrive. People say things like, "They don't panic. They're solid. They handle pressure well." Those labels matter. Because when pressure hits, people look for anchors. They look for stability. And they look to the person who has shown it consistently. That person becomes the leader whether they want to or not. You don't need their permission to become that person. You don't need approval to regulate yourself. You don't need validation to remain calm. Calm is an internal decision. And once it's internal, no one can take it from you. Now let's connect the dots. You stopped trying to impress. You lowered your volume. You controlled your reactions. You spoke with intention. You detached from validation. You used stillness. You set boundaries. You let actions replace explanations. You became comfortable with being misunderstood. All of that built one thing: calm. Not surface calm, deep calm. The kind that doesn't crack under pressure. That's the advantage. Because pressure is guaranteed. Stress will come. Conflict will come. Uncertainty will come. Calm people don't hope pressure won't happen. They prepare for it. That's discipline. Here's the hard truth. If you don't choose calm deliberately, life will choose chaos for you. Chaos is default. Calm is trained. You have a choice. Let your emotions run you, or train them to serve you. One path is easy now and painful later. The other is hard now and powerful later. That's the key. Now let's talk about practice. Calm is not something you turn on when it matters. It's something you practice when it doesn't. In traffic, in conversations, in small frustrations. Every time you choose not to react, you reinforce the pattern. Every time you pause, you deepen the groove. Calm compounds quietly. That's discipline. Here's a daily rule. When something triggers you, don't ask, "How do I fix this?" Ask, "How do I stay regulated?" Because problems solve themselves better when you're calm. Reactions make problems louder. Calm makes them smaller. That's the key. Now understand this. Calm does not mean passive. It does not mean weak. Calm people make decisive moves. They just don't make emotional ones. Their decisions are cleaner. Their words are sharper. Their actions are more effective. Because emotion isn't blurring judgment. That's the advantage. Over time, this creates a gap. Others burn energy reacting. You conserve energy choosing. Others chase control externally. You hold control internally. That gap widens. And eventually it becomes obvious. You're not faster. You're not louder. You're not more aggressive. You're steadier. And steadiness wins long term. Always. You have a choice. Live for short-term relief or long-term authority. Short-term relief comes from reaction. Long-term authority comes from calm. That's discipline. Now here's the final realization. Calm is not just how you respond. It's how you're perceived. People trust calm people with responsibility, with leadership, with pressure, because calm people don't collapse. They don't infect others with panic. They stabilize the environment. That stabilization is rare, and rarity commands respect. Quiet confidence doesn't announce itself. It's felt. It's felt in your posture, in your pacing, in your silence. Before you speak, people already know. This person is grounded. That's the goal. Not admiration, not attention. Grounded authority. You don't need their permission to become this person. You don't need approval to stay calm. You don't need validation to trust yourself. You have a choice. Remain reactive or become unmistakably grounded. Choose grounded because calm is not a phase. It's a permanent advantage. And once you claim it, nothing can shake you. This is where it all comes together. Not in noise, not in performance, in presence. And presence, when disciplined, becomes power. You've built the foundation. Now live it. Quiet confidence is not a personality trait. It's a decision, repeated daily. It's choosing restraint when others react. Stillness when others panic. Precision when others ramble. You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to prove intelligence. You don't need approval to stand firm. The world respects those who respect themselves in silence. That's the key. From this moment forward, let your calm become your signature. Let your discipline replace your explanations. Let your presence do the talking. The challenge is simple but not easy. The next time you feel the urge to react, pause. The next time you want to explain, stop. Choose quiet confidence. And let the respect come to you.